All right, so thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to talk today about diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM, but I want to preface first that as you know, I am a physicist. I have a passion for DEI work in STEM, but I'm not an expert on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've spent the last decade about attending many professional development opportunities related to DEI, and I facilitated professional development in DEI for chairs on campus and faculty and staff across the state. And I've received funding that Dr. Chandra mentioned related to diversity and inclusion initiatives, but I am a physicist. So as you listen to what I'm saying today, please recognize that there are a lot of folks out there whose specialty is diversity and inclusion. Many of our sociology colleagues on campus and across the country, and colleagues in women's and gender studies departments, and many folks of color whose life experience and life work and scholarship is related to diversity and inclusion. So I'm giving a perspective on DEI from a fellow scientist who deeply values diversity and inclusion in STEM, and who has a knowledge of how to implement some initiatives in STEM departments. And we have some success with that in physics and astronomy, but I am not necessarily a diversity and inclusion expert. So, okay, so with that caveat, here is an outline of my talk. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about me, because who doesn't like to talk about themselves? And second, I want to talk a little bit about all of us and why recognizing our privilege and working on our bias is crucially important. It's a lifelong continued improvement process, but how eliminating our bias is impossible. I third want to talk about why diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, is important for physics and STEM in general. Fourth, I want to talk about the negative effects of systemic racism and bias on marginalized students and faculty. Fifth, I want to talk to you a little bit about what we can do today to change our classrooms, our research labs, the departments, and university culture to create a little bit more of an inclusive environment. And then last, I'm going to talk about how the changes we've already made in the physics and astronomy department at Appalachian have changed some things with our students and faculty, although we still have a lot of work to do. So, okay, so I have, as Dr. Chandra mentioned, and many of you know this, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about the fact that this is my 13th year at Appalachian, my third year as chair. I currently serve as chair of the university's Council of Chairs, where I act as the liaison to the university for the 64 chairs and other department representatives on campus. I've previously served as an associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences and as the director and assistant director of the Master's Engineering Physics program. Many of the students in that program are here today. In all, I've had nearly 9 years of progressive administrative experience. Received a Bachelor of Science degree in Applied Science from UNC Chapel Hill a very long time ago. Received my master's and PhD from Colorado State University. I'm the co-director of the Biophysics and Optical Sciences facility with Dr. Brooke Hester in the department. I've co-directed, as Dr. Chandra mentioned, what was once one of the largest research groups at Appalachian, at least up until I became an associate dean. It's still an incredibly large research group, thanks to Dr. Hester. Mentoring or co-mentoring with Dr. Hester over 80 undergraduate students and 30 graduate students in my time at the university. As Dr. Chandra mentioned, I brought in or helped to administer, well, I don't know that he mentioned this, but I brought in or helped to administer over $2.5 million in externally funded grants. 1.6 million of that is PI. And he did mention that I'm currently PI on $1 million NSF Advanced Program grant. Dr. Hester is also a co-PI on that, as is Dr. Claudia Cartaya, who's here today. And that is through the Advanced Program that is aimed at creating systemic institutional change to enhance recruitment and retention of women faculty in STEM with a focus on intersectionality. I'm going to talk a little bit about that grant today. I'm also currently a PI on a $300,000 PhysTech consortium grant aimed to grow the physics secondary education program to enhance opportunities for students. And I recently was honored to receive the International Award from the Optical Society for my diversity and inclusion advocacy. I'm also highly dedicated to teaching. And in recognition of my dedication to students, both in and out of the classroom, I was the 2015 University of North Carolina System Excellence in Teaching Award recipient for Appalachian State University. So, okay, so I didn't go through all of that just to brag about myself or to bore you. It's a tradition for us to give our professional biographical information at the beginning of talks, and or for someone to give that for us. So why do we do that, one might ask? And I'm asking that. So we do it to make people think that we know what we are talking about? Maybe. To brag about ourselves? What is that about? Do we do it for politeness? Is that why we tell people about it? To make people think that we are not strangers, to make people feel comfortable with us? In general, we do not fact check each other with this. You trust the person that invited me to talk to you, trust me. You would trust me even if you don't know me. You would just trust that I have credentials. I could have totally lied to you. I've given this talk twice now this semester at University of Colorado, or at Colorado State University. I gave it at Wake Forest. I could have lied to them. It would be harder for me to lie to you than at other places, but I could have. I didn't, by the way. Well, maybe a little bit. My $1 million grant wasn't, that $1 million grant we got wasn't exactly $1 million. It was $994 something thousand. The $300,000 grant isn't exactly $300,000, 299,000 something, but close enough. One thing I didn't tell you, we do leave out information that puts us in a negative light, right? One thing I didn't tell you is that recently I was 2 weeks late returning in a report to my dean. I don't typically tell the faculty about reports that I'm late turning in to the dean. But I was. The $1 million grant that we recently got, we applied for that the round before and we didn't get it. And in fact, 2 of the reviewers that reviewed that grant actually told us that it was only fair, not very good. So I don't typically tell people that. And I guess the point to all of that is that we hide things typically that come across as negative when we can, right? And we show things off very proudly that come across as positive. And that's good. That's if we're good at advocating for ourselves. So it turns out that white men are in general better at promoting themselves than others. That in and of itself actually leads to some pretty big inequalities. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Also, which is really important, is that not all of us can hide the things that come across as negative. So it's natural for all of us to create images of other people outside of the information that they choose to provide to us, even when they provide us no information at all. And this is what bias is. So bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, a person or a group, compared with another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. And while people certainly have conscious bias or intentional bias, often bias is unconscious or unintentional. And throughout my talk today, what I'm talking about is the bias that's unintentional or unconscious bias. So think for a minute about what bias you have about me. Most of you know me, at least somewhat. Some of you know me as the chair, or your professor or a colleague. Some of you have known me for years. I started working here, like I said, 13 years ago. Some of you don't know me at all, maybe. Some of you think you know me, but maybe you don't really know me, right? And while there are things that we can hide from others, like my late report to the dean, there are other things that we can't. I can't hide from you the fact that I am a woman in my 40s or 30s or 50s. I can't hide from you that I'm overweight. Some of us have the privilege of being able to hide things that bring up negative bias in others, but others cannot hide that. So people of color can't hide their skin color. People with accents can't hide their accents. People with non-Western names can't hide their names. And all of those things likely conjure negative bias in us. even at a subconscious level. And it's very interesting. Studies even show that many women have negative bias against other women. Many people of color have negative bias against people of color. It's not cultural. I mean, it is cultural, right? It's not personal. And so we imagine things about others without even trying, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but likely incorrect. So even those of you that have known me for 13 years likely have ideas about me that are not correct, and vice versa. So for example, if you didn't know me, or if you don't know me, as you are listening to me and we're listening to all my credentials, and were you picturing me maybe, I don't know, with someone that has children or didn't have children, somebody with a husband or with a wife, with no partner at all, with dogs, with cats, as a straight A student, as an undergrad, as a college dropout, as a geek, as somebody super boring, somebody super exciting, somebody fun to party with maybe, or are you just so bored that you have already tuned out and you can't remember half of what I said, some of which might have been really important, right, to your perception on whether or not I'm an expert at the content of this talk. Am I? Should you be listening to me? I don't know, right? Should you be paying any attention to me at all? So now imagine for a second, right, if I was a Black man with a really strong Southern accent, would your opinion of me be different right now? I imagine it would be. And that is what bias is all about, is the alteration of how we feel about someone based on how they look, how they sound. And so do you think that there are ways maybe that I'm tougher on men, since I'm the diversity and inclusion woman, right, that's here today? Somebody that's hilarious, hard to work with, right? Never any fun. Maybe none of those things. I don't know, right? I've been talking for not very long. So I think likely by the end of the talk, right, you'll have formulated different opinions about me, especially if you don't know me yet. And so by the time often that we hear somebody talk, especially if you don't know them, after an hour, you feel like you know them a lot better than you did at the beginning, but likely you don't, because you've only listened to them talk for an hour. So it's a very interesting thing to think about these things. But it's okay, right? It's okay to have unconscious bias. We all do. We can't help it. And we do it with individuals we just meet. We do it with strangers giving colloquium. We do it with Black men we see in the street. We do it with the Hispanic women students in our classes. We do it all the time. We do it every day. We all see color. We all see race and gender. It affects our interactions with everybody. And if you think you don't have bias, and if you think you don't see race, you are deceiving yourself. This is an inherent thing to humans. There's an interesting study I'm going to put in the chat window real quick. So psychology researchers showed in this study that as early as 6 months old, that a baby's brain can notice race-based differences. And by age 2 to 4, children can internalize racial bias. And so that study talks a little bit about that. So it's okay to have bias. What is not okay is to ignore the fact that you do have bias, to pretend that you don't have it, or to think that you have fixed it, because you can't fix it, but you can work on recognizing it and adjusting your actions based on your bias. So the sooner that we all accept the fact that we have bias toward everyone, the sooner that we can work on that bias. But I want to note that this is a continual lifelong improvement process. It should be part of our daily and weekly routines, like exercise and healthy eating. It makes us better humans. And I'm going to talk about ways to work on this during this talk. And maybe more importantly, or at least equally importantly, we need to immediately begin or continue to work toward breaking down systemic issues created by years of this bias and systemic racism that exists within our department and other departments at the university, and within the university and within the world, that adversely affect our students, staff, and faculty from underrepresented populations. And I believe that the time for change is now. So I hope to kind of show some data throughout the talk and some other information that helps to elucidate that. So I do meet people on occasion who tell me that they've been to enough diversity workshops, that they've learned it all, that they're fixed, and that's not possible because bias is so ingrained in our culture and our being that we can't really fix it. So as I said before, right, this is about continued improvement and lifelong work. So alternatively, I meet people who find the entire idea so daunting that they don't know where to start. And I think that it will take, they think it'll take so much time away from what their already activities they're doing, right, that they can't fit the work in. So I have another link. This is one of my favorite places to go. So this is a thing called Project Implicit. I don't know if you have ever heard of it before, but this is one of the things to start with. If you don't know where to start, or if you have never been here. And Project Implicit is a place to go to test and to gauge your bias. This was founded in 1998 by 3 scientists. And I'm just going to read this. The mission of Project Implicit is to educate the public about bias and to provide a virtual laboratory for collecting data on the internet. Project Implicit scientists produce high-impact research that forms the basis for our scientific knowledge about bias and disparity. So this is run out of Harvard. It is a really interesting place to go take tests. I have I know you might not be able to read this well, so I'm going to read this off a little bit. So they have tests on multiple categories of bias. This is one of the first things I did. I think I took this about 10 years ago. Is one of the first tests I took. It was highly disturbing. I took a test. There's a test on gender and science that I took to gauge your bias against gender and science. And when I took it several years ago, I found out that I was incredibly biased against women scientists. And as a woman scientist, I found that incredibly disturbing, that I was incredibly biased against women scientists. And so it goes through these process of flashing up pictures and words, and you're supposed to click buttons on your computer. And there's all these different tests. There's one on weapons, skin tone, Asian Americans, transgender, religion, disability, sexuality, race. The gender and science is actually still there. Gender and career, Arab, Muslims, age, weight, presidents are the ones that are on there right now. So just for fun, a couple of weeks ago, before I gave my talk at Wake Forest, I actually retook the gender and science test. I hadn't taken it in 8-10 years, something like that. And it actually showed that my bias against women scientists is no longer there. And I was at least thrilled, right, that all this work I've done on my own bias over the last 10 years, there's at least one data point that I've improved in one area. So I think that that it's worthwhile taking some of these tests. They take about that one maybe took me 5 minutes, 7 minutes. And it's something worth doing. So I encourage you all to take a look at that. So I work on learning more about diversity, equity, and inclusion every week. It is part of my continual improvement as a human. So just like we spend time weekly on scholarship, on learning about our scholarship, teaching, gardening, cooking, exercise, watching sports, favorite television programs, I think DEI work should be part of our weekly routine. Even just a single article can help you grow immensely, not just as a human, right, but as a scholar and an academic. And I think that that improvement can massively alter outcomes. So if you want to do more than that, of course, there's always more you can do. And you can attend as much professional development as you can. Even if you think you have seen it before, repeat it. I go to workshops that I have been before and seen, and then you see it again, right? We all know, right, when we teach physics or chemistry or whatever topic that we teach, that if you see it over and over and over again, you learn it again. So if you want to work with others instead of by yourself, book clubs are something that I have recently picked up from our colleagues in the humanities and the social sciences. We're running a book club with the Council of Chairs right now. And I've listed a couple of books here that I have been reading. I'm gonna put them in the chat window. So white fragility, why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism, how to be an anti-racist, and so you want to talk about race. These are three pretty fabulous books. If you have an interest in reading a book, and you can read these alone or read them with others, they're all on audio. So I am actually have listened to 2 of these as I drive back and forth to work. It's another thing that you can do as part of your continual improvement. So I hear some of my STEM colleagues talk about diversity, equity, inclusion as not necessarily important to STEM as it is in other fields, because we are scientists, and science isn't about such things as emotion and things like that. So science is about facts and data, right? So I have a friend that I have heard on occasion say, "Can't we just do science?" And the answer is no. We can't, unfortunately, because scientists are humans, right? And humans are biased. So I want to talk a little bit about why diversity, equity, inclusion matters in STEM in particular. And first, of course, it is the right thing to do, right? Valuing diversity and inclusion should be the goal of any fair and just society, any group, any department. But the other side of it is that we want the best scientists, the best students, regardless of color, gender, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability. Diversity of experience and thought is what catapults advancement in science. And we recognize this in academia, right? We recognize that diversity of background is a good thing. We want applicants to our graduate programs from institutions broadly. We encourage undergraduates to apply maybe to institutions other than our own sometimes. We want faculty from programs maybe other than our own. I don't know, we like this idea of broadening, right, diversity of thought. And so having diversity of background is similar to that. And all those things bring diversity of thought, right? That's a good thing for science. In addition, there is a big issue related to diversity and inclusion and equity in the STEM workforce. And so I have a slide here that I pulled from the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, from their Sea Change initiative. This is from 2017. This is the US resident population and the STEM workforce. Get my little pointer up, there we go. STEM has 2 M's purposefully because they're including medicine in this, but the workforce does not match the US population in the STEM with a double M. So for example, in the US population, the majority of the US population is white women and white men, about equally represented. But the science and engineering workforce is predominantly white male, followed secondly by white female at less than half. If you look at Latino males, right, which represent 8.1% of the population, they only represent 5.2% of the workforce. If you look at Latina females, which represent 7.7% of the population, they only represent 2.3% of the workforce. So there's this huge imbalance between the population in the US and the actual workforce in the STEM with a double M, right? Workforce. So there's this massive imbalance happening. And so, so the fact that there is this imbalance implies that we are not doing something right in our educational system. And so I have a little bit of workforce data from Appalachian as well to show you in a minute. But I want to talk a little bit more about the data and why demographic data is so important. So we talk a lot when we talk about demographic data everywhere, right, in the country, at the institution, about general demographic data, but it's important to understand how that demographic data breaks down among race and gender lines, as well as other factors like first-generation college students, non-traditional students, veterans. And the reason for that is because people from different backgrounds are affected differently by different policies and procedures that are in place at institutions. There are, of course, always exceptions, right, to this. But understanding detailed demographic data can help us understand how to alter policies and procedures, how to shift resources, how to change our pedagogy in our classes to best serve different populations on our campus. So as you all know, right, but maybe some of you don't know the specifics, Appalachian is a master's comprehensive university. So for students that are here, this means that we don't grant PhDs, but we do grant master's degrees. We currently sit at 20,000 students, or we did fall 2020, 18,000 undergraduates, 2,000 graduate students. We're one of the 16 universities in the UNC system. And here's, all these wonderful things about us. Third, consistently ranked top public university in the South, top regional university in the South. The Physics and Astronomy department, according to American Institute of Physics data, is one of the largest physics and astronomy departments of its kind in the country. We have about 155 undergraduates. We graduate about 30 to 40 a year. 34 master's engineering physics students graduate about 15 to 25 per year. When I do this slide at other universities, everybody goes, ooh, they find that incredibly impressive. So this data is breakdown of demographic data of North Carolina Appalachian State students, Appalachian faculty, and Appalachian STEM faculty is what this table is showing. And so this is from fall 2019. This is from when we wrote our advance grant. So it's about a year behind. As you know, right, Appalachian is a primarily white institution. The underrepresented student population is far lower than that in the state. I gotta get there we go. Okay, so we've got the student data here, right? North Carolina state data here. You can see the Hispanic or Latino data here for students, right, versus the state. Black or African American students versus the state. And then we have 2 or more races, Asian and American Indian and Alaskan Native. The Appalachian faculty is listed here. And then we broke it down into STEM faculty listed here. So not surprisingly, the percentage of diverse faculty in STEM lags behind the percent of diverse student population by about 8%. I think perhaps surprisingly, the underrepresented population of Hispanic faculty and those who identify as 2 or more races are actually higher in STEM, right? Here, right, we're actually higher in STEM than in the general population. And we're actually higher in STEM than the general population here for faculty. So, but the issue of disparity between the students and faculty is not just in STEM. So you can see that the faculty, Black or African American faculty lag behind Black or African American students, and Hispanic or Latino faculty lag behind Hispanic or Latino students. So we have an imbalance between students and faculty from underrepresented populations. The advanced grant is related to women faculty in STEM. And so, but I want to emphasize, because I'm getting ready to talk about faculty a lot, I want to emphasize that faculty, right, are not the only population that's important. Student data is really critical, but our grant's about faculty. So, okay. So this, again, this faculty data is from fall, I have fall 20 on there. Is it from fall 20? It's from fall 19. Sorry, that should say fall 19, not fall 20. We collected this again for the grant, so it's a bit out of date, right? It's a year out of date again. So, so one of the things that I want to share, this is by, our grant is related to STEM departments, but it includes the social sciences. STEM is defined very broadly by the NSF. And so we have data here that shows that chemistry, psychology, anthropology, and sociology, so shown at the bottom, are at least equal percentage of women faculty in those departments. Computer science and physics at the top here, physics and astronomy, are shown at the top with the lowest representation of 24% and 30%. Geography and planning, biology, mathematical sciences, geological and environmental sciences, still less than 50%. But so it goes from low percentage of women to high. Good job, chemistry. I have to say that because they're here, but no, I believe it. Good job, chemistry. Okay, and chemistry actually has other really good numbers I'm getting ready to show y'all in a second. Chemistry and fermentation sciences does. So more strikingly though, and is the underrepresentation of self-reported women faculty from underrepresented populations. So look at this data. 5% in anthropology, again, this is from fall 2019, not fall 2020. 5% in anthropology, 4% in biology, 15% in chemistry, which is an outlier, 4% in mathematical sciences, 10% in sociology, and 0% in every other department. But there are positives. Physics and astronomy and chemistry are two of the positives in all of the sciences, natural sciences and social sciences at Appalachian. Physics and astronomy department only has 30% women faculty, but this is significantly more than the national average of 19%. But at the time the grant was written, there were no persons of color in the physics and astronomy department, whereas the national average is 17.1%. Chemistry is a true outlier, beating both the national averages for women and underrepresented minority women by significant margins. And one of the things that we're working on right now is to better understand both of these outliers so that we can help other departments figure out what they need to improve upon in order to fix these in their departments. More data. So the data I'm going to show you in the next 4 slides are related to the percentage of faculty in STEM, same department makeup. The dark colors in all the graphs are women, and the light colors in all the graphs are men. And obviously there is a balance, okay? So not surprisingly, there are more men faculty than women faculty. This is a trend across the country. This is showing the percentages of total men faculty at App State. And the total women faculty at App State from 2014 to 2020. So this data has been updated for this year. Okay, I'm still a year ahead. I've got my dates wrong. That should say fall 2020. Okay, so we've got a slight maybe increase happening, but it stayed pretty even in total faculty. This is broken down by tenure status. So we're seeing modest increases in the proportion of tenured positions held by women. So these are folks who have already been tenured. We still see a 20% difference between male and female tenured faculty members, but there is a modest increase happening. All right, non-tenure track positions. Currently, women hold about 10% higher than men in non-tenure track positions. This is, here's an article in Inside Higher Ed. This is not uncommon nationally for women to hold non-tenure track positions at higher rates than men. They are lower paid positions. And there's a lot of discussion about why women end up in these positions more than men do. So I'm not going to go into that in this talk, but there's a whole another talk we could have about that. But there's an article there if you're interested in reading about it. This is the interesting data for Appalachian. We discovered this as we were writing our grant. We don't believe anybody had ever really recognized this before. And this is, I talked before about looking at demographic data and breaking it down into different ranks. And this is one of the things that we looked at. There's a dramatic decrease happening at Appalachian in the proportion of junior tenure track positions held by women. Junior tenure track positions have dropped from 48% in 2014 to 37% in 2020. So we are proposing that these data suggest that Appalachian is failing to recruit and retain women in junior tenure track STEM faculty positions. And so the advanced team are hoping to create systemic changes at the university to help reverse this trend. And this is one of the main reasons we think we probably got the funding. I show you this data as an example of what interesting things can happen when you start to break demographic data down and understand what issues are going on at the university. So it's this just incredibly dramatic decline happening. If you look at the, you can look at the data. When you actually look at the data itself, we're hiring both men and women. The women data is flat and the men data is rising, is what's happening. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, we have the same number of women in the department as we did before, that's true in general across departments, but we have a lot more men than we did before. This is a percentage number, not a flat number. So, okay, so I'm done with the data at Appalachian. So how does this bias, right? How does bias in general and systemic racism affect women students and students of color? And I have I've heard in recent years at Appalachian stories related to racism, bias, and personal struggles from colleagues, friends, students from underrepresented and disenfranchised populations on our campus. Some of these stories include African-American student who I heard at a listening session one time that told me he is very frequently asked by faculty and staff if he played well in the football game last weekend, and he is not on the football team. But because he is Black, people assume he is on the football team and ask him all the time how he played in the game. I heard of a first-generation college student that lived in a van because he couldn't afford housing. I had a colleague in business that talked to me about a Chinese student who had a research mentor over in business that changed that student's name to a more American sounding name. Heard in another listening session about a Black male student who, while traveling on the local city bus, was asked by a townsperson, "Aren't you supposed to sit in the back of the bus?" We had another listening session, an LGBTQ+ student who told me that they can't use their preferred name and pronouns at home and in other places for fear of violence. And so students of color often have to deal with racism both inside and outside of the university that burdens them in immeasurable ways. Sometimes these are overt acts. Sometimes they're just very subtle acts of microaggressions, which I like to think about as death by 1,000 paper cuts. If you're unfamiliar with microaggressions, and these are important for both faculty and for the graduate students that teach in our program, this is an amazing video that I really encourage you all to watch that talks about microaggressions in the classroom. This is good for you. Even if you aren't teaching in our grad program, you students should watch this so you can see what fellow students might face in the classroom. It's a quick watch. So many groups, right, are immediately disadvantaged because of the inherent structure of our classrooms, including first-generation college students and students of color. If we as faculty are teaching the exact same way that we taught 10 or 20 years ago, we are likely teaching in a manner that is not best for diverse learners. I bragged about my teaching award that I got 5 years ago, which I got because I was nominated by a bunch of white students. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that the method in which I teach, I alter some of the way I teach now, but is likely best for white privileged students. And I think that we need to recognize that we were taught, most of us, in a way that in a way that has been built up over generations for white privileged people typically. And so there are a ton of online resources out there for learning how to teach more inclusively. App State has some resources, which I'm putting in the chat window. That is those are App State resources of how to teach more inclusively. If you're not interested in those, oh, here's two other ones. This is about classroom teaching. Here are two more from App State. But Colorado, there's a American Association of Physics Teachers also has a really great resource about inclusive teaching that has a ton of different links on it. So if you want physics specific inclusive teaching information, AAPT has one, and the American Physical Society also has a really good one as well. And so this is not something that just, I mean, I know a lot of people, right, the colleges of education talk about this. A lot of the resources at App State are not discipline specific. If I'd known all the chemistry folks were here, I would have grabbed some stuff from, I'm sure American Chemical Society has some of this, but AAPT and APS have these are really, really good resources to look at. So I encourage us all to be looking at that. I would equally say that if we are mentoring students in our research labs in the same way that we were mentored, or the same way that we mentored students 10 or 20 years ago, that we're likely not mentoring students in the best way for diverse students and women. So I discussed a few slides ago things that you can do differently to kind of help yourself, right? And it's important to recognize that we can do things differently to help our students. And I want to make a really strong note here that altering the way we teach for diverse learners is not changing rigor. We can maintain the same level of rigor in our classes and in our research labs while accommodating diverse learners. So I think that a lot of times people feel like we have to somehow lower rigor if we don't teach the same way we've always taught, and that's not true. And the resources from APS and AAPT talk about this. So there's a lot of peer-reviewed studies out there about this. So as far as women of color faculty and women faculty are often disadvantaged in their progress toward tenure and promotion in their careers because of lack of mentorship and in what's called invisible labor. And so, for example, women and faculty of color are mentored informally far less than their white male counterparts. And this is one reason why formal mentoring programs are so important. The Advance grant is working to create formal mentoring programs across the college in collaboration with the dean in order to help combat this. As for service, faculty of color are often asked to serve on more committees than their white counterparts, as all committees want representation from faculty of color. Women are often asked to deal with more caretaking type roles than like department tours or helping students with emotional issues. And all of these types of service roles add up. This is what invisible labor is. And service is not recognized in the same way on promotion and tenure documents. And when service is, more service is expected from our colleagues of color and women and is not recognized on promotion and tenure documents in the same way, it ends up hindering progress toward promotion and tenure for women and people of color. So one way that we can all help with this is not just letting junior faculty, women and faculty of color do all the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Older white men can contribute to DI work too, so be an ally. The chairs in the council of chairs recently have been talking about the fact that the vast majority of the DEI work happening on Appalachian's campus right now are happening by junior faculty, women and people of color. So I'm getting ready to put a bunch of links in the chat window. These come from Chronicle of Higher Ed and other places. Science, there's a great article in Science Mag from here. All of these links are examples of things that issues of women and faculty of color face. There's hundreds of where these came from, right? These are the types of articles I was talking about that I read on a weekly basis to kind of help me become more aware of the extra burden that our colleagues and students of color face. This is for faculty and students should be reading these. We should all read these. It really helps give me a perspective on what's going on. So I know in our department, we send these out through email a lot to the listservs. So this Science Mag article is amazing, by the way, that first one that's up there. Okay, so in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, what we have done as the faculty, many of the faculty know, but for the students' knowledge and for our chemistry colleagues, we need to redo some of this training because it's been a while, but faculty and staff underwent unintentional bias, Title IX, and LGBTQ+ inclusivity training, I guess the year before COVID hit. I'm very proud to say that attendance rate, I did not require that, and I'm proud to say that attendance rates for faculty were between 85% and 100%, and 100% for staff. The student teaching assistants, the graduate and undergraduate, do have bias and Title IX training in the department. As department chair, I asked when I became department chair, I created a student inclusive excellence chair advisory board. That group ended up being so active that they're now a campus-wide student club, the Student Inclusive Excellence in STEM Club, or SIE STEM. Their mission is to increase awareness related to diversity and inclusion in STEM, and I'm serving currently as their faculty advisor. Faculty and staff in the department found a small space within the department, which is almost impossible to do. I don't know if the students realize how difficult it is to find space, but it was so important to the faculty and staff that we find space for a small food pantry that they found it. And we've ended up raising in excess of about $3,000 to support the food pantry, which is free to anyone who has need. I'll give you an example in Dr. Hester's and my research lab of something that we do related to DEI to give some folks some ideas. So we actively discuss matters of diversity and inclusion in our weekly lab meetings and our group meetings. We share articles like I've given you examples of today about the struggles of underrepresented populations in science. We talk about how to support colleagues to how science is working to help underrepresented populations in various ways. Dr. Hester has this amazing ability to find these wonderful pop science articles. Our students bring them to us. One of the most recent ones was a new pulse oximeter for your finger when you go to the hospital that reads your pulse ox that they've developed for folks with darker colored skin, which a typical pulse ox does not actually read well for folks with darker colored skin because white people created it and didn't create it for darker colored skin. We help our students with writing CVs and cover letters, how to apply for jobs, how to be more professional. Our research lab's not just about science. We still do science, lots of science. Our students get into PhD programs and do amazing things with their science, but we teach other things as well. We teach them how to self-promote. I mentioned at the very beginning of our talk that this is in general harder for women and people of color to do, but white men have issues with this too, right? Everybody needs to learn how to self-promote. If you want to read a little bit more about how to self-promote, especially for the students, learn to self-promote. There's a really great article about self-promotion. So we can all discuss diversity and inclusion in classes in the same way, but also take time, of course, to talk about contributions of women and underrepresented populations in the field. I think a lot of us do that, but that's not all. This is a really amazing article that everybody should read. This is from PhysRev. I encourage my chemistry colleagues to read this too. This is an article from Physical Review that indicates that one of the best ways to positively impact underrepresentation of women in the physical sciences is by talking to classes about the underrepresentation of women in physical sciences. So some of us are doing that in our classes now because of this article. And so we have kind of extrapolated, I haven't seen an article that says this, but we've extrapolated this idea about underrepresented populations as well, other than women. So as I mentioned before, I think we send these articles that I've been showing you, right? I send a lot of these out, as do other folks. Mix Elise Weaver sends a lot of these out, as well as our Inclusive Excellence Liaison to faculty staff listservs on important days. We send out things on Holocaust Remembrance Days, on Juneteenth, MLK Day, Black History Month, right? All related to diversity and inclusion, but kind of linking it to physics and astronomy in some way. A lot of the faculty and staff try to model behavior in the department. Some of us have our pronouns up on our Zoom session. Our pronouns are up on our website. A lot of us are becoming more comfortable with calling each other out and speaking up when we see each other using microaggressions or incorrect pronouns or exhibiting bias. This is really uncomfortable to both do but also to be told you're doing something wrong, but we're saying thank you to each other instead of trying to be defensive. We've been working on that. So we've seen some really good improvements in the department. I don't even know if all of the faculty and staff in the department know about these, so I'm happy to be able to talk to them about it. So since 2018, the percentage of self-identified women undergraduate majors has averaged 22%. And this is the highest average prior to 2018 was 18%. So we're slightly above the national average, which is 21%. And the department is actively working to increase the number of majors who identify as women. The department currently has an undergraduate student population of about 17% from underrepresented populations. That's about the same as the percent population in the university. According to the American Physical Society's most recent data, the average in the country is only 13.5%. So being We're higher than the national average at a predominantly white institution, and we're equal to the average of the university, which is really unusual for physics and astronomy. Our graduate program's diversity is not as high, and we're working on determining how to better recruit and retain underrepresented students in our MS program as well. We have worked on recruiting more diverse faculty and staff. And in the last 2.5 years, we've been able to hire what's the statistic? I think we've had a 70% higher rate from diverse populations. And previously, to my knowledge, at least, this might be a little off because we don't have statistics, but to my knowledge, the department has only had 2 underrepresented faculty in the last 15 years. So, but we have a lot more work to do, right? I talked about continual improvement is the key. One of our continual improvement goals is part of the Sea Change initiative. I showed a slide on that earlier, that we've just been asked by AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, to be one of 3 departments in the nation to be a pilot department for the Sea Change program. I'll put a link in the window for that if anybody's interested. That program will provide us resources to work on identifying and changing systemic issues within our department and barriers to the success for women students and students from underrepresented populations. So we're really excited about that. So I just want to quickly thank my collaborators from the NSF Advanced Grant, Andrew Bellimer, Associate Professor in the Department of Biology, Brooke Hester, Associate Professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, Claudia Cartaya-Marin, Chair of the Department of Chemistry and Fermentation Sciences, and Willie Fleming, Chief Diversity Officer of Appalachian. And that is my talk. And I can't figure out how to stop. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burris. It was a wonderful talk. And as a relatively new person in the department, I can certainly agree with Dr. Burris that I have one of the most friendliest colleagues who are always willing to help. And that's kind of a culture we have in the department. And that's great for us. Do we have any questions? Any questions for Dr. Burris?
I got one for you.
Yes, Dominic, go ahead.
Thank you for the talk, first off, Dr. Burris. I enjoyed it. It can be difficult to talk about, diversity and inclusion at times, but having awareness and a willingness to talk about it is always great, especially here at App, where statistically, I think it's like 85% of students or something are white. So I kind of just have a question that isn't directly related to the statistics you brought up, but I kind of want to know, what is your opinion on how to best approach speaking to somebody of authority or a superior in some manner who has very blatant and obvious biases that they don't realize they have? When you can hear it in their sentences and the things they say, that their biases have an immediate effect, a very obvious effect on the way they think and do things, but they don't realize it. I know that's probably kind of a weird question, but.
Yeah, I don't think it's a weird question. I think it's a tough question for me to answer. I've experienced that with people before, and I'm thinking of how I've handled that situation in the past. And with a supervisor or a boss, it's particularly tricky because they're in a position of power over you, right? And so when you have someone in a position of power over you, and you're being treated in a way, and they're unaware of it, it's just particularly tricky. So I think it's such a personal thing, right? So I guess I'm going to answer it in a personal way as to how I would handle it. And I think that everyone has to make their personal choice, because it's a very personal thing, because it can potentially be risky with someone that's in a position of power over you. So I think that the way I would handle it is one of two ways. I would either ignore it, because I would be worried that there would be some sort of retaliation, and I would deal with it by talking to colleagues and friends and handle my emotion that way. And maybe I'll say I'll deal with it one of three ways. That's one way to handle it. A second way I would handle it is go to someone else in authority at the organization to complain about it, because it is not okay behavior. And so there is always typically a pathway, like at the university, there is a pathway to deal with that. If you have a professor that is causing you that sort of, if you're in a situation with a professor that's treating you that way, you can go to the Title IX office, you can go to the department chair, right? You can go talk to somebody about it to have them help you deal with it. So that's a second way to handle it. A third way to handle it is to talk to them directly. And I think that the way that I would personally handle it if I chose to talk to them directly is to be honest about my feelings and to let them know that I am feeling uncomfortable and that I respect them and that I think that they would want to know that what they're saying is hurting me, and that this is how it's making me feel. So those are the three ways I can think of how I would handle it. So I hope that helps, Dom.
Yeah, thank you. Ironically enough, or I don't know if it's ironic, but funny enough, the certain situation I'm thinking of where I was kind of at a loss of how to handle the situation was during a job interview. And this was it was a job I obviously wanted. I was interviewing for it, but it kind of threw me off to begin with, and I didn't really know how to handle it. And I ended up just kind of ignoring it. But yeah, I was just curious as to what you might have to say about that question. Thank you for answering.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna follow up with that then. If it's a job interview, I guess there's a couple of things. The first is, that's really interesting that it was a job interview. There's a couple of things I think you could do at a job interview. One is you could walk away and count your blessings that you figured out that there was somebody that had those sorts of behaviors before you got the job, and walk away and go find another company to work for. The other is that you could contact human resources at that company and let them know of your experience. If you wanted to have another experience, right? That's another thing, is you contact human resources and say, I just want to let you know that this is the experience I just had when I interviewed for your company. And I really was interested in working there, but I just had this experience and I thought you'd want to know, because a human resource department would be very interested to hear about that. And the third would be, again, in the interview to say, I'm getting some vibes here that are making me really uncomfortable. And yeah, but at the end of the day, what sucks, right, is that you were uncomfortable in an interview, and that's not okay. So, but yeah, I'm sorry you had that experience. Any other questions?
I think Greg had a question. Greg, are you still there?
Hey, yeah, I am still here. Yeah, I do have a question for you. And I was mostly concerned with that graph that you showed of tenure track women versus men over the past 5-10 years. What do you think is the major cause of that? Because you said retention was strong, and that we kept a similar number of female tenure track faculty over the years. However, we've seen an increase in male. So do you think that is because of the application process, in that we're not getting our word out to women or scientific in the science field, or do you think that's for other reasons?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Greg. We actually don't know the answer to that yet. So it's one of the things we're trying to figure out what's happening. We need to kind of see if we can delve into the data a little more. I'm not actually sure we can answer the question. Human Resources hasn't been keeping track of all of that data necessarily over these last years of what they've started recently. In the last couple of years, they've started keeping track of who is applying, what are their backgrounds, and they weren't keeping track of that as well in prior years. So it's one of the things we need to look into to kind of understand better. But I think you kind of were thinking along the right lines, right? Like, what have people not been applying? Are we not writing ads in a way that are attracting women as well? You know, what is it that's happening? But I don't know that we're retaining women. That's another thing we need to look into, right? Is, are women coming and then leaving at a higher rate than men, or not? And I think that the data shows we have a problem. We don't quite understand why we have the problem yet. And that's one of the things we're trying to figure out. So yeah, thanks for the question. Hey, Sarah, I see you have a chat in the chat window. So it says, thanks so much for the talk. What factor or factors do you think can be accredited to the recent change in hiring? What do you think the department can keep doing to continue that trend? So Sarah, what I think, and I'd love to hear if other faculty have any ideas about it. I think that the main change has been that we have been really focused on talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the department in the last 3 years. And focusing on the conversation. In addition, in our hiring practices, we have started to ask for diversity and equity and inclusion statements, like real statements. How does diversity, equity, and inclusion, how do you weave that into your teaching and research? We've been asking for applicants to talk about that. So that we can get a sense of how important that is to them. We've also been asking questions in our interview process about that. And so I think that we're showing on our website things that show that we value diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we are showing that the department, we are training ourselves, and we are showing that the department values diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that there's a lot of evidence out there when you read about this, right? That talks about how that's the best practices as to how to better recruit folks to apply. And then we're hiring the best people that apply. So that's what we're doing, I think.
Do we have more questions for Dr. Burris? I have a question of my own.
Yeah.
I was really quite amazed at when you spoke about how a 2-year-old can develop bias, right? So I just want to get your thoughts on what do you think as a society we can do so that, you know, those biases don't tend towards that 2-year-old becoming a racist later on. Anything that can be done, you know, at the grassroots level, so that by the time the 2-year-old comes to college, becomes a student, that person is better equipped to deal with, you know, the problems we are facing now.
If I could answer that question, I would be the queen of the world. Yes, I am. I don't know. I think that's one of those questions that I think is better asked of an expert in diversity, equity, inclusion. I do not know the answer to that question, but I think it's a wonderful question to ask.
I have a comment on that, actually. So like from whatever I've observed about kids, they are so good at copying, right? So they basically do whatever they see other people doing. So I think that if they see the inclusive nature of their parents or the adults or other people, even other older kids that they're around, then that's going to bring like such a huge change, because they basically end up copying what the adults do, and then their biases are not natural. It basically comes from the grooming and you know, like all the things in the society that goes on. So yeah, I think that's part of what needs to be changed.
Carol just put a great link in the chat window. That link I put to that article, I think has that link, Carol, that you put in it. So that article that I put in the chat window about the 2-year-olds has links to some resources too, Cyan. But you know, a lot of the literature that talks about bias and about how it's so inherent in our culture, it's not what's unfortunately terrifying, right? Is it's not just about the household. It's about the culture. So the reason that women are biased against women and people of color are biased against people of color is because it's about the television shows we watch, and it's about the products on the shelves, and it's about, you know, what we see in our daily lives everywhere, right? We're all, no matter what home you are part of, I mean, you can help, right? Obviously, as parents, you can help a great deal as to how you raise your kids, but a huge deal. I mean, we can see that all around, right? But at the end of the day, we're all watching the same television shows and the same commercials, and we're all seeing the same thing in our culture that create bias in all of us in the same way, some level of it. So.
Thank you.
But we're making the world. Here's my hope. I learned this from Dr. Hester. We talk about all these horrible things that make us sad, and then we have a moment of hope, right? So here is my hope. The world is getting better, and all of you are going to make it a better place. So there's my moment of hope. So train yourself. The best thing I think we can do is to make ourselves better humans, because as we work on ourselves and make ourselves better humans, right, we are automatically going to make the world a better place. So that's the first step.
That's a positive note. Do you mind if I share this on YouTube, Dr. Burris?
Like to the whole world?
No, the recording, so that I can have those links that you've shared, you know, as
sure.
at the bottom of the, okay. So for everyone here, I will be posting this on YouTube, and all the links that Dr. Burris has shared will be there under the description.
Yeah, and actually, you know what I can do real quick? I have all of those links in a file that I can put in the search window real quick. I didn't update it for you all, but I do have it from my last talk if you all want it. Would that be helpful? And then you're still welcome to put it on YouTube if you would like. So for those of you that want to stick around for a minute while I find it, I can do that too. Thank you. If I can find it. Now you're all staring at me and I'm under pressure, and I'm kidding. I'll find it. Give me a second. Oh, I'm not going to be able to find it. I'm not. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Let me double check it real quick. Yeah, this is it. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna pop this in the chat window. So this is when I gave the talk at Colorado State University. So I think there might be like 1 or 2 links in there related to Colorado State University in particular, but it's got everything else on there.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Do we have any more questions? If not, let's thank the speaker once again for the wonderful talk. And,
thanks, everybody.
And have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.